we have all speakers and we probably should start. I will do as a moderator until Taras arrives. And I'm very happy to open this second parallel session on the very important trade issue, that namely customs and standards, because we all know that tariffs have recently reduced in the world. Now they are growing again, but so far not across the whole globe. But non-tariff barriers are now the key issue to be discussed, to be analyzed, because it is, on the one hand, it is the internal policy of each sovereign state that they want to ensure that the products supplied on their markets are safe, that they protect their national security through also protecting their borders, ensuring that the goods that they do not want to see on their markets, arms, drugs, etc., are not flooding into the country. On the other hand, we are all interested, and businesses interested, that the barriers are low and they do not take time and effort if there is honest businesses want to ensure that they trade smoothly. We have a wonderful panel here, and I am very happy to present the first speaker, but no, I present Taras KACHKA. Yes. Okay, Taras, I did introduction and I'm passing the floor to you.
Me and Veronica, we are interchangeable, yeah, in terms of explaining things like trade and customs cooperation. Yes, so I think that I'm glad that Veronica helped me. And we had plenty of events, and as a representative of International Renaissance Foundation, I also opened a session on EU law in our Institute of International Relations. So we have plenty of EU events today. Since Veronica has already introduced our speaker, so I once again give the floor to Michael. Do you think? Okay, so Michael said that I should start in order, which is okay. So Denis, Denis, Program Director, Expert-Grup, Moldova. The floor is yours. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. Though I would not mind if you would start, because we have contributed to different papers together. So I think that we have similar or maybe even the same opinions about actually how DCFTA is impacting the economies of Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. But I'm very happy that we have the possibility to speak about the real impact and effects of DCFTA on countries like Moldova. Why? Because I had the opportunity to have different interesting interviews and discussions with stakeholders in Moldova. And apart from what is nicely described by the government, by the central authorities as good results of DCFTA, and it's true, DCFTA is, let's say, the positive part of European integration in Moldova in comparison with political chapters of association agreement. But if we look into details, and we know that devil is hidden in details, then we will figure out that actually not everything is that nice, smooth, and well operating. I have pointed out for this presentation 3 challenges that, in my view, are endangering the good implementation of DCFTA. So first one is effective application of quality infrastructure. Yesterday and today we touched upon this issue. We mentioned about the Moldovan officials mentioned about good speed of adoption of European standards, which is about 80% from the out of 27, about 27,000 of Moldovan national standards, about 80% are reflecting the European standards, which is a huge number. But the question is how much of this 80% is effectively applied. And here is a huge question. They are voluntary. Standards. Of course, nobody is forcing the business to adopt them. Business are buying these standards, but there is always this temptation to use GOST. Why? Because the accreditation body is still giving accreditation to laboratories which are operating assessments based both on ENS and GOST. So this possibility of having certificates both on GOST and European standards create this kind of let's say reluctance from the side of business about real interest to apply these standards. Sometimes it's about mentality. And I was told, honestly, in a very sincere way, that some business is still deeply connected to GOST philosophy, that these are the best standards adopted so far, that these GOST standards allow to penetrate the Russian market and CIS market. But in reality, the GOST are actually sometimes conflicting with ENS, especially if if European standards are included in regulations. And then we have huge problems because there are government-adopted regulations which have obligatory character. And these regulations have clearly mentioned European standards. And these specific European standards are conflicting with still used by some business GOSTs. Why? Because companies are going to laboratories and they still have these certificates on the possibility of being assessed according to GOST requirements. So on the one hand, we have very good speed of adoption of European standards, and I should applaud the contribution of the National Institute for Standardization. They are doing a good job. But then we have accreditation body which believes that the interest of business should be a priority, and if the business still believes that GOSTs are good, then we should keep GOST, which is a wrong perception, obviously. What is also important to mention in regard with the European standards is that sometimes this process of changing the equipment and start to produce according to European standards is costly. And obviously this is one of the arguments which is used by the business when they oppose to do that. But I think that what should be really pointed out in this aspect is also that it was a decision, a political decision, that we should adopt all European standards until 2019. And there is this huge interest to have this as a big achievement. And sometimes, as I understood, the technical committees which involve business are not always attracting businesses in consultations. And sometimes businesses are reacting against European standards when they are already adopted. I will tell you two cases. It was about the weights. And it was about the milk, dairy products. So first, in the very beginning, the GOSTs were eliminated. The European standards replaced them. And then we got two opposition calls from the business, which asked the government to withdraw these European standards because they are not ready, because to implement European standards is costly. And at some point it was this resistance from the business side, but then as I checked lately, the government came back to the initial position. So European standards on weights and dairy products remained in place. So the business sometimes tries to work by all the tradition and all the tools, but as I understand, the standardization from this point of view is quite strong. Again, we should work with accreditation, and we should understand how laboratories should be accredited. They should have both GOSTs and ENS. If we want to really change the mentality, then we should stick to ENS, but at the same time, we should ensure that businesses is well informed and it is not really forced. They should not be felt as forced to accept ENS. The second point, which is also very important from the perspective of challenges that DCFTA meets in Moldova, is the integrity of regulatory and inspectory bodies. And here I have the two cases of ANSA, which is the National Food Safety Agency. Right now, this agency is going through institutional changes, but a few years ago, it was involved in different schemes. The gray schemes, which were involving businesses which were trying to corrupt phytosanitary inspectors. We had at least two cases when through bribing phytosanitary inspectors and obtaining illegally documents. Of course, they were illegally issued, so which means that they were at least, they had not a legal base behind. It was the case of Moldova selling Polish apples as Moldovan apples to Russian market, because Russia introduced the embargo on various European foodstuff products. And the second case was a scheme which was involving Transnistrian companies, breakaway region of Moldova, Transnistria, and Moldovan phytosanitary inspectors were giving documents to fictive exports of Transnistrian goods to Russia, because as you know, Moldova is still under embargo of Russia, and only some companies, including those or specifically those from Transnistrian region and Gagauz autonomy, has the right to export on the Russian market. So this loophole, which was created in my view deliberately by Russian officials, were used by some smart business representatives in Moldova, from both sides of the Dniester River. I mean, both from the constitutionally controlled territory of Moldova and separatist region, in order to export in very let's say gray ways goods from Moldova. And the second institution that I mentioned is Customs Service. This institution is also under the shadow of corruption. They adopted, I should say that they adopted different regulations on improving the integrity of those who are working within this body. But if you look in the polls, then you'll notice that still businesses and even the ordinary citizens have big doubts about the integrity of this institution. What I should again stress with regard to customs service is that we adopted recently the new customs code, which is very much inspired from the European EU customs code, which in a way elevate the standards and transpose a lot of provisions from the European customs service acquis. But I think that this process will last. It will involve a lot of secondary legislation, and one of the problem for Moldova, and I believe that for Ukraine and Georgia as well, is not the primary legislation, which is adopted, which looks nice in the reports, but the secondary legislation, which actually put in real effect and application the provisions, the core of provisions of DCFTA. And here we have problems in various sectors. It's not only about customs service or phytosanitary or even TBT, but I think it's a cross-cut problem for the entire association agreement and DCFTA. Last but not least is in my view the challenge related to legal application of DCFTA provisions. And here I would like to recall a case, a Prosecco case, and Michael know about this case because we discussed it in Brussels as well. When some producers in Moldova were trying to produce Prosecco, which is protected, which is a geographical indication protected under the agreement with the European side, and it's originally it's from Italy. And we had the cases when some producers were trying to sell under the same brand Prosecco on the local market. And of course, the problem was one of the arguments which were used by the producer is that the association agreement was not yet in force fully. So it was before 2016. We have two cases on Prosecco. And one case, it was a real confrontation, I would say, between the Agency on Intellectual Property, which was actually an active promoter of respecting of provisions of DCFTA, and the confrontation with other institutions. And the other case was in the court, where one of the explanations were that the agreement was not fully in place. So even if the DCFTA was provisionally enforced from 2014, September 2014, we still had judges who were thinking that if it's only provisionally enforced, then it should not be yet applied fully. While, as I understand, there is a clear, let's say, position that Moldova and other countries, associated countries, should act in the spirit of DCFTA and association agreement. So if these provisions are included in association agreement, then they should be implemented even if it's only provisionally in place. Thanks God, now the association agreement is fully in place, so nobody can invoke this, in my view, not serious argument. But anyway, we have this position, and why I mentioned this specific situation is because we have a lot of judges that should be professionalized in terms of DCFTA. We have DCFTA adopted, provisions should be implemented, but we have judges who are not fully aware of what are the implications, legal implications of these provisions. And Prosecco case showed this situation. I'm glad that we have some efforts right now, and they are lasting for a few years on explaining judges about property rights, and in other areas, what are the obligations of the Republic of Moldova. And I hope that things will improve, so we'll not have any kind of, let's say, paradoxical situation when the European producers should face unclear judicial sentences in Moldova. Last but not least, I would like to add to three mentioned challenges. The existing monopolies in some areas related to exports, and I would like to specify about the monopoly on exports of cereals. It's about the Transoil company, which is linked very close to Vlad-Plahotniuc Business Association, and this company is controlling the exports of cereals. They are buying at very low prices cereals from small farmers, and they are disadvantaged, obviously. They cannot sell because everything is channeled to this monopoly. And then we're speaking about nice figures of exports which are increasing, of tariff quotas which are reached. But behind of these nice figures, we have disadvantaged small farmers which are not protected because we have monopolies which are very close to the power, to the ruling party. In conclusion, I would say, and here I agree very much with our colleague from the previous panel, that institutions are not crucial or important, but are fundamental for the entire functioning of the association agreement and DCFTA. I strongly believe that we should focus on judiciary. Judges should be independent and professional. And I believe that the European delegation in Chisinau, Kiev, and Tbilisi should really monitor how the sentences which are ruled, which are issued by courts. And second thing, which is in my view macro level, is the political certainty. When Moldovan different branches of executive power in Moldova are stating different geopolitical perspectives for Moldova, this is really very disturbing for investors, for those long-term investors which would like to come to Moldova, because the current ruling party were saying until a few weeks ago that they are very much interested in keeping the European path. And then we had the pro-Russian president who was saying that we would like, not only saying, due to his contribution, Moldova became the observer country in the customs Eurasian Union, Economic Eurasian Union, and also developed a memorandum of cooperation with the Eurasian Commission. So we need, apart from functional institutions and provisions of DCFTA applied fully, we need also political certainty in order to have this, let's say, safety for the investors that nothing will change overnight. And we know that we unfortunately are living in this region where political decisions are radically changed overnight. Thank you.
Thank you, Denis, for this really in-depth overview, and it's for me personally, it's quite useful because we here in Kyiv are struggling with the same cases even somehow, sometimes because Prosecco producer, or let's say the organization controlling this geographical indication is quite aggressive in Ukraine as well, because this is, I think that Prosecco are lazy Italians because they registered it as geographical indications only in 2010, and they missed the opportunity to be on the list of GIs to be protected under association agreement with Ukraine. That's why they went individually to register their GI in Ukraine, and it's also a case here currently, yeah, with them. But it's sometimes this case shows that sometimes there are peculiarities and differences in agreement, and since we are talking about industrial cooperation and technical barriers to trade, I want to underline the difference between Ukrainian agreement and Moldovan agreement on association, that Moldovan agreement on association is wiser in terms of technical barriers to trade, because it includes not only harmonized areas of technical regulations, but also non-harmonized area of technical regulations. It means that Moldovan government was at least rational in terms of thinking what is their interest in technical barriers to trade, because Ukrainian government for 20 years just confirming the same new approach directives at the EU, and it means that Ukrainian business still has no interest in industrial cooperation and concluding ACAA agreement. That's why it's so delayed, because neither EU nor Ukraine are really pushing for it in comparison what is happening with food safety. Indeed. So that's why I think that we can compare a lot, and as well as you mentioned about phytosanitary and market structure for cereals. It's also quite interesting is that you mentioned two cases of corruption in phytosanitary. In Ukraine, system of phytosanitary was a system of organized corruption, because we had almost 200 phytosanitary quarantine zone on the territory of Ukraine. It worked like customs. So then when you move your shipment or cargo with cereals from one district to another, you should pay another $1 per ton to authorities, because it was like a movement from one quarantine district to another. That's why phytosanitary was a first big deregulation in Ukraine in 2014, and it was like really boost for cereal markets, and then we moved to phytosanitary. But at the same time, your structure of market, when there is a one trader, yeah, who buys cereals and grain from small farmers and then export to other states. In Ukraine, we have other system, other structure of market, but it shows how it was unwise for the EU to push for exclusion of agricultural policy from the association agreements, because we really have very small elements of agricultural policy in the association agreements, only tariffs and some market standards of classification of fruits and vegetables, and that's it, and something on organic. Nothing about market structure, and that's why I think that we have these imbalances, and we have no possibility to use European experience in influencing market structure as well. So this is just, it's not like my comment to your speech, but like a bridge to the intervention of our Georgian colleague, just to show that in this boring area of technical regulations, phytosanitary, customs rules, and food safety, there are let's say, foundations of trade which are extremely important, because this is like an infrastructure of trade in comparison to tariffs, which are like, let's say, front visible front of trade. All this stuff connected with different certificates, procedures, and so on are so important that they sometimes even more influential on trade than visible barriers. But unfortunately, it's so difficult to explain to general audience, to public, why it is important. In Ukraine, the only case of successful explanation of this was food safety, because it was really drive from business who really pushed for opening of dairy markets, especially for the poultry and then dairy products. It was quite intensive advocacy from business, and that's why it was successful to explain to parliament, to politicians, to government that it is important. Other spheres are suffering from their technocratic nature. Yeah, they are so boring. So, Lasha, your view on Georgian view on this substance, whether you share Denis and mine vision of all these things. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Lasha INAURI. I represent the Ministry of Environmental Protection and Agriculture of Georgia, the Department of European Integration, so I'm directly engaged in these processes, coordinating the process of implementation, association agreement, and its deep and comprehensive free trade area part. And I'm directly dealing with SPS, sanitary and phytosanitary measures. Unlike Ukraine and Moldova, it is quite widely regulated by the association agreement, agricultural sector, and separately, the fourth chapter of the CFTA regulates sanitary and phytosanitary measures, and Georgia undertook significant commitments in terms of approximating
Lasha, just for the sake of clarity, so that all three countries took commitments on food safety, my remark was connected to this market organization and market structure. So this agricultural and rural policy of the EU, which is, let's say, excluded from all three agreements. Other elements are indeed included, and we have a lot of 60 pages of different provisions on food safety. So here the same story. Yeah.
Okay. In terms of agriculture, the separate 10th chapter, I assume you have the same commitments to cooperate to develop agriculture and rural areas through the convergence of policies and legislation in this direction. And first of all, I would like to start that agricultural direction is one of the top priorities for the government of Georgia. And approximately 6 years ago, this direction was not considered as priority. It was presumed that this direction can be regulated by the market. It's not necessary to have state control systems. It's not necessary to have strategies, to have action plans, and so on and so forth. But after signing the DCFTA and association agreement, the situation changed, and it became a priority. And consequently, relevant strategies for the agricultural development as well as the rural developments were approved by the government of Georgia. Taking into account that 42% of the population lives in rural areas in Georgia, and almost half of population is engaged in the agricultural activities, it makes sense and it's reasonable to make this field priority. In these terms, it should be noted the cooperation with the European Union contributed much to develop mentioned strategies, as well as to initiate relevant state support programs in terms of agriculture and rural development. You might be aware that European Neighborhood Program for Agriculture and Rural Development, so-called NPART, is one of the most successful stories. And in the frames of the mentioned program, these strategies were elaborated, and particular supportive activities have been initiated in the frames of these programs. I would like to make a small remark regarding the export of different product and trade with European Union. You mentioned in your presentation, and I checked some data, and according to the data of 2018, first 6 months, the export to the European countries have been increased by 32% in agricultural products. So we have this positive trend here, and I hope that we will continue this process. I also would like to touch upon sanitary and phytosanitary measures, which are closely and directly linked to the market opening and better access to the EU market. Yesterday and 2 days ago, all these 2 days, we speak about that this legal approximation is a technical one. It's not so important, and the main attention to be paid to the political decisions and political wills and so on and so forth. But in my practice, I'm witnessing that when decision makers are meeting with each other, for instance, members of a parliament, European parliaments and Georgian parliament, or maybe commissioner meets a minister, they take the political decisions, they agree that, for instance, we will open market for certain types of products, but they always come to the DG Sante asking about whether it is reasonable to open market or not. And then we face this sanitary and phytosanitary measures, and we evidently see that it is also a part of the policy making and policy. So it is very important to follow this approximation program. And so far, Georgia is quite well on track. We have adopted this legal approximation program, which envisages approximation to 272 regulations, directives, and decisions. But our approach is a gradual approximation approach, and we took this period for approximation from 2015 to 2027. And we are intending to gradually transpose requirements of European legislation into our internal laws. So far, we have already approximated our legislation to 74 EU regulations, directives, and decisions. Main horizontal legislation are in place. As my colleague rightly mentioned, the main focus should be made on secondary legislation as well. And in these terms, I would like to mention that we also fulfilled all commitments timely. We transposed the secondary legislation as well, which concerns state control in food safety, as well as hygiene package, some restricted residues, microbiological conditions of food, and so on, etc. Especially, it was very, let's say, sensitive for the private sector when we introduced these requirements. But our approach is here that we try to establish transitional periods in order to give time to private sector, and not only private sector, state authorities also require time to get prepared for upcoming changes. You were mentioning about readiness and awareness rising of judges in your country, maybe. Before we go to the judges, it is very important to conduct sufficient trainings for the inspectors as well, who are directly implementing these regulations. And this is also a challenge for us, because we all agree that European approach and European legislation, especially in the sanitary and phytosanitary measures, is quite strict, let's be honest. And this wording and this, how to say, structure of this legislation is not so easy, and it needs special knowledge to get into depth and to understand what is defined by the legislation. So one more challenge was to elaborate some kind of guidelines here, where in a simple way we could explain to the state inspectors as well as to the representatives of the private sector what particular requirements should they meet, and to adjust their business to these requirements. Of course, this is not an easy process, and we have a very active communication with the donor community to support Georgia in this regard. And little by little, we are elaborating such kind of guidelines. Apart from that, it is very important that we are trying to conduct trainings and workshops for the inspectors. As you might be aware, comprehensive institutional building program, which is initiated by the European Union, is being successfully implemented at the National Food Agency of Georgia, which is a responsible authority for food safety control, veterinary and plant protection. And a number of trainings are also included in this development program, and it's quite a useful tool for us to implement all the requirements. Very important is engagement of civil society and private sector in the legislative process. It is our strong commitment to enable all representatives of the civil society to participate in the legislative process. Of course, these legal acts are not elaborated by the lawyers. There are working groups established by the ministerial order, and all representatives of the different field, different legal entities or institutions are presented there. They are the experts of different directions, food safety, veterinary and plant protection, and all draft regulations are uploaded to the web page of the ministry. And the Ministry of Economy separately established a specific web page, DCFTA-GOG, where all the draft legislation with other requirements are uploaded there. And any stakeholder has this opportunity to provide their remarks and comments on the draft legislation. Apart from the uploading to the web page, we also conduct meetings in the regions of Georgia, where we meet specific focus groups who might be affected by the newly adopted legislation, and we explain them about upcoming changes. Of course, the attitude from the private sector, let's say, they are not very happy with this upcoming changes. It's better for them to use existing legislation. Actually, to be precise, there was no legislation. It was easier for them to operate. But now, little by little, there is a demand from a private sector. Consumers, let's say, are requesting for a safe food, also high quality food, and I think Georgia is going forward in that direction. Even though there were some, let's say, awkward situations when adopting European regulation, especially in the regions. I remember there was a story when we adopted identification and registration rules on bovine animals, and you know it has an element of air tagging and issuing passports and so on. People started jokes. Why does my cow need a passport? I'm not going to send him in European Union and so on. It was really, I would like to emphasize how important is proper communication with the private sector. And we initiated a strategic communication strategy. Government of Georgia approved it with a sufficient action plan, and we started meetings in regions with the private sector, with the population, farmers, in order to inform them about everything in details. With regard to the export of animal origin products, we know that it is a bit stricter. They have strict requirements for this type of product, European Union, because it's considered as a high-risk products. We are not allowed to export any animal origin product until signing of this CFTA, of course. But since that time, we started negotiations with European Union to open European market for honey and honey products produced in Georgia, as well as the fishery products, because it was a demand from the private sector. They pushed us to communicate with European Union. So it took us 2 years. We elaborated action plan. We requested for the FVO mission, Food and Veterinary Office mission. They arrived in Georgia, assessed situation in the field, what legislation we have, how private sector is ready or not, and they elaborated their recommendations. We elaborated the action plan, started legal approximation, started communication with the private sector, and after 2 years, our residue monitoring plan for this honey products was approved by the DG Sante, and accordingly, European market was opened for honey. And in 2016, if I'm not mistaken, Georgian fish are also allowed to be exported to the European market. Apart from that, particular business operators, we are granted authorization to export animal byproducts to the European Union, such as unwashed wool, treated hide, skin of the bovine animal, and honey intermediate products, honey venom, if I'm not mistaken. So it also resonates with deliverables 2020, where we have that one of the indicators of these deliverables is to have increased the number of the enterprises that are allowed to export animal origin products. So in this regard, we are intending to continue close cooperation with the European Union to identify more and more animal origin products that can gain access to the European market. And the last point that I wanted to point out is that when we are talking about, let's say, how to measure whether it is successful or not signing of this CFTA, and we should not look only on export numbers and figures. It's my opinion, because me as a representative of the ministry, which is responsible for food safety, veterinary and plant protection, I should emphasize that it is one of the biggest benefits that is stemming from the CFTA. We are improving and transforming our food safety system. We are transforming our state institutions, and our consumers will be able to have access on a more safe food. Their animals will be better protected from veterinary disease, and accordingly plants will be better protected from pests and some harmful organisms. This is our main message when communicating with populations, that we should not be focused only on figures, only on export, although it is very important and we are working in that direction as well, but also to see the tangible results which will be affected on our everyday life. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lasha. Indeed, so I really like to hear these kind of stories, because they are sometimes as once again the technocratic, but at the same time they show the exact transformation. And when we are talking about food safety and export of products of animal origin, I think that for everyone who is involved in this EU integration, this is the best example of institution transformation, because food safety is 100% a bureaucratic exercise, because you can export dairy products, poultry or honey, if your bureaucracy works in the same way as EU bureaucracy. So it's not only about legislation, it's about how exact inspector in the field is working in somewhere in KACHKA or in near Chisinau or near Kiev, yeah, and in Ireland, yeah, so this equivalent. So it's about bureaucratic habits of particular persons. That's why it's about building institutions. And Ukrainian case, and I think that Georgia and Moldova go in the same path, is that we managed to build this successful institution in different, we are moving different way, because Georgia went through the, let's say, drastic deregulation when all the institutions were just liquidated and there were no regulations, full freedom. Ukraine went through, let's say, boring post-Soviet type bureaucratic transformation, because we tried to merge sanitary and veterinary services into new food safety agency. But both states are going by the path of developing this institutional habit, so a habit of particular inspectors, and that to have enough number of inspectors in the field in order to ensure that bureaucracy works in the same way. And for Ukraine, which has more sectors for export, we have two examples of successful bureaucratic and business post-Soviet transformations. And one of these cases is promoted worldwide. This is a poultry case, because when we started negotiation with the European Union, we were a net importer of poultry. So we imported poultry from US and Brazil, and we exported only 14,000 tons to Russia, so for former Soviet Union, and where there were no perspective for exporting to any other states, both economically, so in business side, and regulatory as well. Now, Ukrainian case is considered every 3 months by EU Management Committee on Poultry Market, because we managed to use, let's say, fully liberalized 10-digit code on poultry, which is, it goes beyond quota. Yeah, we have tariff rate quota 36,000 and 1 or 2 codes on poultry which are quota free. Yeah, and we use to the maximum. So now we export 80,000 tons of poultry to the EU. We are third after Thailand, and so Brazil is just dropped out because due to these veterinary issues as well. So we are, let's say, in top 3. I don't remember other state. So this is a major success. So it's so successful that the EU feel threatened by Ukrainian poultry. So it's once again, so that this is not about charity. If you are too successful with exporting to the EU will be really nervous about it. So, but nevertheless, this is really a case how business transformation inside Ukraine, regulatory and bureaucratic transformation inside Ukraine, transform the whole industry. And the same story with dairy products. Dairy products, even after aggression of starting of aggression of Russian Federation, our dairy producers, especially cheese producers, said that we shall continue to stick and to former Soviet Union markets, because we have no possibility to sell dairy products anywhere else. Last year, Ukraine managed to squeeze New Zealand on the market of butter, usually because New Zealand was a, let's say, worldwide champion of export of butter. We exported about 2 times more than tariff rate quota of butter to the EU. It was once again, let's say, coincidence of different market factors, but it was a result of business transformation and bureaucratic transformation of Ukrainian authorities. So sometimes what is really visible, when you read all these 60 pages of even more pages of food safety requirements in association agreement, it's suicidal. Yeah, it's that I think that Finnegan of James Joyce is more understandable and clear than a food safety chapter of association agreement. But but it results in a really visible transformation of business environment and success stories. So. But we have also that when we are talking about technical regulations and food safety, we have another area where success is also possible, but not yet visible. This is a customs, and I want to invite Robert ZELDI to explore a little bit on this, because we believe, because we cooperate with Robert as well on promoting these things, we believe that after trade liberalization, after tariff liberalization, after food safety and technical regulation liberalization, the customs, let's say, not liberalization, but mutual recognition of different customs element can really result in almost free movement of goods between associated country and the EU. And it will result to really bold and significant economic integration of all free states with the EU, and it will be really success story. About peculiarities of this customs visa-free, so how we call it, I think that Robert will explain you in, let's say, with pleasure and passion. Yeah, so Robert.
Thank you, Taras. First of all, when we are talking about the biggest promise of the DCFTA, in fact, we are talking about the access to the single market of the European Union. And when we are talking about the growing numbers of exports, we have to know that this is only and mostly due to elimination of the customs duties. But when we have a closer look on the other side of export procedures, the administrative part of it, so we can see, and this is not my point of view, but also the point of view of certain OECD studies, that for many countries, the benefits from the more efficient customs and trade procedures could be as high as those from reducing the tariffs. So to put it in simple words, the more similar are the customs rules, procedures, and regulations, the easier is the trade across this Ukrainian-EU border. And ideally, we could speak about the full level access to the single market, where if the customs border between the EU and Ukraine fades. And of course, we heard about the discussions in the European Parliament on the Eastern Partnership Plus model, including the prospect of joining by Ukraine and other associated countries the customs union. Well, so this would be a task far more challenging than implementing the commitments under the association agreement. But in the same time, Ukraine and the associated countries have to remember that the Eastern Partnership Plus model will be offered to those who demonstrate, who have the ambitions and demonstrate the pace and quality of reforms. So what we have in this prospect? Fulfilling our commitments under the association agreement is, of course, our homework. But with implementation of these commitments, we behave as expected. And what should Ukraine, for example, do to exceed these expectations? Overall, we should remember the basic principle of the EU, of the Eastern Partnership and the Eastern Neighborhood of EU, which is very simple, more for more. So more progress in reforms should be rewarded, and this is partially for the European partners, should be rewarded by more opportunities and benefits from the European side. So we developed a policy paper which briefly explores the way how to gradually dismantle the border between the EU and Ukraine without the political burden or political part of joining the customs union or etc. Because, well, we know that this is a sensitive issue, both for EU and the associated countries. So we believe that this can be done via two directions. First, the optimization and simplification of customs procedures related to trade between Ukraine and the EU shall achieve the state that each party trading with its counterpart on the different sides of the border should have to go through a minimum number of formal requirements in relation to goods which are traded. The second direction is harmonization of approaches to the customs control, to the procedures which are done by the customs officials in a way that would have reduced these controls on both parts of the border. And this could be implemented by way of mirroring the basic EU requirements to import of goods from third countries, because Ukraine, as well as other associated countries, imports a lot from trade countries. What is very important from this prospect, that it can't be achieved within with implementation of the commitments of the association agreement. There should be a clear vision that such dismantling of the border is beyond the requirements of the association agreements. And in this respect, it is also very important to set the goals now, both for Ukraine and for the European Union. Because I do believe that under such a way, the associated countries will not require an official joining of the customs union. Because in fact, when the Commission and the EU will be ready to announce the start of the negotiations, if the associated countries will go in this direction, it will be only rather a formal bureaucratic procedure of signing the relevant papers, because the trade already will be done with so much minimum of official controls and procedures that the business, I hope, won't even notice it. Thanks.
Thank you, Robert, for this conceptual introduction of customs topics and things. And I think that I also want to maybe to build a bridge between our yesterday session, where Michael participated and I was as well moderator, that customs features, or let's say customs, step in customs, so for association states are best visible in connection with Brexit, once again, because Brexit highlight how important for UK it is to maintain this customs cooperation. That whatever the trade regime will be, what UK wants to maintain in any scenarios is possibility of this smooth movement of goods via borders, that customs procedures are not influenced, that this experience of being both members of the same customs zone, UK and EU without UK, should result in non-building of barriers, and so that's why this is a protection of common experience. But at the same time, this is also how UK explains this, how UK present this, also shows what we are aspire to. So what Ukraine aspire to, what Moldova and Georgia aspire to, and this is once again also a let's say mechanical, bureaucratic, or even legalistic challenge for all three of us, because in comparison to food safety chapter, or chapter on customs and trade facilitation is not so detailed. Yes, so that there are annexes with customs code and so on, but all the necessary elements which allow us to build the same level of mutual trust and mutual recognition of customs procedures between Georgia, Moldova, Ukraine, and the EU are embedded in our association agreement. So this is also a challenge for both parties to agree that within existing legal framework of association agreement, the same level of customs mutual recognition is possible, and it's possible and achievable and feasible as well. So in order to allow us to make this trade really, let's say, transform trade into something really economically integrational. So I'm intentionally speaking this, let's say, complicated language, because sometimes people ask where it is envisaged. So where this mutual recognition of authorized economic operators are envisaged in the agreements. I say, okay, there is no clear instruction how this mutual recognition will be achieved. And Robert, I think that we will add on this. But the provision in the association agreement, existing provision of association agreement, provide necessary legal basic for implementation of this kind of project. So, Robert, if you want to, just to comment on this, feel free. Yeah.
Just a few words. So, to explain it more simply, when Ukraine or Georgia or Moldovan business exports goods to the EU, first, the goods undergo customs control in the country of export, and then the goods undergo customs control and customs procedures in the EU. And the association agreement, of course, provides for certain parts of the European Customs Union to be implemented in the associated countries. But the association agreement doesn't provide for simplification of controls in the EU or in the associated countries, even if the previous control was done under the same legal procedures or the same legal requirements were met. And in fact, the idea of simplification here is to make the customs of the EU and the customs of the associated countries to trust each other in a manner that they do not suspect the goods which underwent any kind of control in the originating country to execute the same control or even more control once again. And from the perspective of the deeper economic integration, when we are talking about the customs union, it is crucial, because within the customs union, even if the goods are forwarded to France, then the France customs usually doesn't perform additional controls, because the French customs trusts the Polish customs when the goods were imported into the EU. And from this perspective, if the associating countries do want deeper economic integration, then they shall at a certain moment met these criteria of trust. And the earlier the criteria will be met, the better will it be, and the easier will come the economic integration.
Yeah, thank you. I think that your statement about that French customs trust Polish customs, there is a possibility for black humor saying for now, because courts are not trusting each other anymore. Yeah, so that that's this story with trust to Polish judicial system, and this is like looming, creating examples of distrust. Yes, but indeed the idea in customs is the same like in food safety, just to ensure that bureaucratic habits and bureaucratic, let's say, routine of customs authorities are similar in Ukraine, Georgia, and Poland and France to the level which allows, let's say, smooth movement of goods between borders. So this is the core, let's say, internal elements of customs union. Yeah, not external border of customs union, but internal. What is really benefit for all of us. I would like to maybe to summarize and provide some additional incentives. Michael Emerson, because Michael, I think that has, let's say, longest history of, or the longest track of explaining, bringing attention and advocating all these TBT customs and food safety topics in relations between the EU and Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine in different forms, so either neighborhood policy, Eastern Partnership, or individual bilateral relations, or association agreements, and so on. So Michael, I think, is one of let's say most systemic thinker on these technocratic issues. At least his papers are always mentioned in any publications, any speeches on this topic. So, what are your thoughts about feasibility of, let's say, this kind of integration, of using these bureaucratic procedures for ensuring economic integration of associating country with the EU?
Thank you, Taras. Something quite extraordinary happened yesterday. In our first session, we expressed certainly ideas, and I think you agreed, reservations about the idea that Ukraine should join the customs union, which your president had been advocating. 5 minutes later, Boris Poroshenko spoke before the Rada with a major speech, and I quote, President emphasizes the proposed changes, no, wait a minute, President plans to move the implementation of his initiative on the three unions, customs union, digital and energy union, but regarding the customs union, he just says deepening cooperation in the customs sphere, which is a thoroughly good idea. So it shows an instant communication between our debates.
I think that this shift in statements of Ukrainian president for last year from for unions, including customs union, to the same idea with small additional remarks, with a lot of thinking inside Ukrainian government and a lot of exploratory work, and that's why I think that it means also that how, let's say, that these ideas are not simply ideas, that Ukraine really think about how to make association agreement, let's say, most operational.
Yeah, okay. Well, of course, I wasn't being terribly serious, but well, the serious point is after the initial announcement, which was not very well thought through, there was reflection, and so the policy position was changed, which is good. Okay, next point concerns something that has not been much discussed yet. It concerns how the pan-Euromed preferential system for rules of origin comes into this story. Of course, all three are acceding to the PEM Convention, and this links to the growing network of bilateral FTAs between your countries and all of those other Europeans who are not, including the EU itself and all of the others in the Balkans and Turkey, a very important case. So this is an important business, and it's complicated, but it's on the way, and so it should be encouraged as an important part of the process. Now, within that business, there is the complication for Ukraine and Georgia in particular that you have parallel CIS free trade agreements with EU bilateral free trade agreements, and the CIS have their own definition of rules of origin, which is not quite the same as the pan-Euromed one. So I've been struggling, I've been losing sleep overnight over trying to understand whether this is a real problem or not. Veronica over there, with whom I've had an intense session on the subject earlier today, assures me that there's not actually a problem. These overlapping free trade agreements don't, in a sense, interfere with each other. Now, the operational kind of case for this is in the event, for example, that Ukraine exports something to the EU, tariff-free, which is made up of some components from Georgia, which in turn have some components from Turkey. So you've got this supply chain, and when you move from Turkey to Georgia, you're in the pan-Euromed system. When you move, however, the goods from Georgia to Ukraine, there was the question as to whether this gets complicated with the CIS rules of origin. However, I'm receiving assurances, I look to you to nod your agreement, that that is not in effect a problem, which is really good news. Okay, I won't lose any more sleep over that one. Okay, a couple of very specific points. Terribly sorry that Moldovan Prosecco has become illegal. However, the good news is that the Ukrainian negotiators managed to get a 10-year extension for Ukrainsky champagne. Yeah. Very, very good. I'm very glad. I like Ukrainsky champagne. I think it's very well priced, and I can't tell the difference between that and Mercier Chandon, personally speaking. And so the price is 1/10. Okay, now on industrial product standards. You remember a few years ago, was it 2015-16, when there was the trilateral between Russia, Ukraine, and the European Union trying to reach some kind of consensus or cooperation over the introduction of the DCFTA, which Russia was screaming about with regard to damage to its economic interests. Well, that lasted about a year and a half with no results, because there was an impasse over it. But Russia had been saying you should scrap the obligation to adopt the corpus of European standards, and you should scrap the requirement to eliminate conflicting GOS standards. And that was the kind of hardest issue. Well, the story goes on as follows. It so happens in the last year, in the context of another project, I had a good look at what the Eurasian Union is doing in the sphere of technical product standards for industrial products. And they actually are converging on European/ISO standards, which are normally the same, very, very substantially. Now, At some point, I was wondering whether this is just rhetoric or whether it was reality. But then the exciting thing was I actually bought a new razor to trim my beard, which, as you would see, works quite well. And on the back of it, I see two letters. I see CE, conformity with European standards, and I see EAC as well, which is the Eurasian conformity statement. So this is concrete proof that they have decided to use identical standards to the European ones, which means that this whole farcical trilateral contestation was actually not even based on sound positioning on the Russian side. Right. So anyway, the good news there is that the harmonization in this respect between the Eurasian Union and the European Union has been advancing rather well. So it's okay, it's good. My final point is really on what is left in the association agreement and in the actual functioning of the customs services that is either good or not so good. We've been looking at that quite closely, and there is a major difference between Georgia on one hand and both Moldova and Ukraine on the other. And this is not a matter of legislative approximation, because you're doing the same legislative approximation, Union Customs Code, and so forth. The question is basic managerial efficiency and decorruption of the services and the quality. Now, there, the Georgian case is very interesting, because as far as I understand, it works there. Their customs services are efficient, decorrupted, and stuff passes through fast. And neither in Moldova or in Ukraine is this the case. And so there's a huge, real, functional, reformist challenge that remains to be undertaken in your cases. And I absolutely agree with you that given the real progress being made on non-tariff barriers, as well as tariffs, of course, this is a remaining very important task, because for Ukraine in particular, well, both Ukraine and Moldova, Ukraine with its considerable, huge potential to be a diversified industrial economy, it's obvious, being direct neighbor of the European Union, to supply, to establish seamless supply chain linkages with the European Union is absolutely the thing to do. And for that, you've got to clean up these services, to use a rather simplistic and gross expression, but I think we know what we're talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for reminder, or for recalling the for recalling the fact that indeed our trilateral talks between the EU, Ukraine, and Russia on association agreement had the same agenda as our panel. So that we talked about technical barriers to trade, food safety, and customs, plus energy. So that the only missing element. Yeah, just to add. And indeed, even so, we spent a year and a half, so 15 months, even more, in our trilateral talks, and we went through every minor and very technical discussion of provisions of CIS, global rules, and association agreement, and we understand that they are perfectly match and support each other, and it was so visible, especially when we talked about technical barriers to trade. I also presented to Russian delegation the fact that they build their standardization on the basis of European rules, and they even have more extensive, let's say, agreements with European bodies, because Rosstandard has an agreement with European Committee on Standardization, which is not the fact for any of of association state, and this is a rather old agreement. Old, I mean, mostly 10 years. And person responsible for technical regulation from Russian Federation said, yeah, it's rational, yeah, we should agree, but the head of delegation said, no, we never will agree. So it means that, and then the later example of Moldova, which was and is purely geopolitical, explains as well that that association agreements are, and this stuff, this food safety, technical barriers to trade and customs, are really complementary to the agreements we have in former Soviet Union, let's say universe or the area. That's why this is not, there is no conflict. But at the same time, I think that what you are saying about these rules of origin thing, that indeed I think that for the bureaucratic perspective, for the certain period of time, there will be a necessity to get two certificates, for one for this SP1 for CIS treatment, if we use duty, let's say, liberalization regime or customs regime of CIS free trade agreement, and UR1 in order to calculate the level of necessary to comply with rules of origin for pan-Euro-Mediterranean system. But it will continue to the time when it will be easier for business entities from, let's say, Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova to trade between them, to use CIS agreement and CIS rules of origin. So this is the case. But I think that in a recent future, I think that for Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine, especially for Moldova and Ukraine, because for Georgia it's a little bit different, we will switch to bilateral free trade agreements in order not to depend from, let's say, Russia-led CIS in terms of defining trade policy. Then I think we can switch to, let's say, pan-Euro-Mediterranean rules of origin. So this is once again how something boring can explain the logic of trade policy. So this is it, and I invite you for comments or questions or introduction, any other topics if you feel that we are too technocratic. Yeah, so we have two hands, one and two.
Yeah, thank you. I coming back because it's the very important subject of this day from my point of view. Quite political, because listen what has been said by Mr. ZELDI, which has been the most, how to say, concrete to the facts. Where are everybody looking for? We have a lot of instruments in order to have better, how to say, exchanges among our countries. And it's clear that the association status should not be the latest that the authorities in Ukraine, Moldova, or Georgia wanted from the relation with the European Union. If it's want to have the full access on the market and to take benefit from it, of course you have to be member of the European Union and to be in the common market. And afterwards, you'll have other type of problems related to the competitiveness and state aids and how you are relating in this market. And many politicians, including in my country, in Romania, are not understanding which is the relation between competitiveness and free trade and so on. In Europe, we are developing now a system which might improve a lot the traffic of the freight, and it's called European Maritime Single Window Environment. It's a proposal of the Commission. Another one, it's electronic freight transport information. These are two technical elements which are debated, including in the European Economic and Social Committee, and will allow true standardization to digitalize the transfer of products and the circulation of freight, and to ensure, how to say, an automated, an algorithmic way to deal with this fact. It's a political matter. Why? Because many governments, and particularly in the Eastern European countries, are the political environment, the elites, are very much related with managing this kind of services, the boarding control, you know, the administration and interior, taxes and so on. And they do not have another image like in Holland, where the political elite are related with the corporation, with the companies, with the freight and so on. So this two type of approach creates the hurdles and the burdens which are appearing in these relations. When the opportunities will grow in the other side, it's highly possible that they will adopt this technological change, which will be unavoidable. So already we discussed about the application of the blockchain technology in this as one of the technology which might allow an automated exchange of data. And through these standards, which are very much criticized by many persons, including in my country, in Romania, for example, why we have to adopt so many acquis and so on. Because everybody has to be, you know, to have a point of reference. Imagine just the Euro 5 or Euro 6, how changed the environment in our countries. How was the situation before? And we discussed in the break. You go to Morocco or you go to Chisinau, and you see what is the difference between being in Europe and under Euro 6 or Euro 5, and being in other parts, what is the difference? It's just a small example, but there are others. And the standardizations allow to digitalize. This is very important to understand, to digitalize and to automatize the entire trade. And this is the real progress.
Yeah, but so I think that with Euro 5 and Euro 6, it's also could be a really the case because this introduction of these high environmental standards just squeeze all these old cars to Ukrainian market, and we have really one of biggest problems with tax compliance, regulatory compliance, and environmental compliance. So we really suffer from your high environmental standards, and your clean air is balanced by our bad air. Yeah, so that's sometimes also to be let's say beared in mind. So I'm not saying that this is a EU guilt. This is a really let's say Ukrainian problem, absolutely. But sometimes indeed that this is a good insight that sometimes small technical regulations like introduction of Euro 5 or Euro 6 standards can lead to massive problem, which is difficult to resolve. So these balances should be maintained. So if speakers are not commenting on this, I will ask Dariusz and then or vice versa. Okay, so then Dariusz was.
I was first. Sorry.
Yeah. So that no problem. You will talk.
Thanks a lot. 2 comments and a question. First, on this customs visa-free, I don't know why you are struggling with how to name this concept. It sounds like importing Irish border. So that's what it is, actually. So this is about sort of conceptual clarity. But in terms of what it will take for Ukraine to gain the trust, I think Michael had an answer. You will, I mean, in terms of institutional cleanup, it's a very daunting task, which I mean you still face. So to gain this trust will take a lot of internal effort. Secondly, on the veterinary and phytosanitary standards in Georgia, very confident, I would say, and fluent presentation, as we normally hear from Georgians and Georgia. But I wanted to also you, if possible, to comment or react, since this forum is a good forum also to bring more evidence on issues, on a real implementation on the ground, not just plans which you announced or described and summarized very well, and about how this is actually all these numbers of increasing export, honey, something else you mentioned, to which extent they create exactly what Ernst was mentioning, transformation of institutions and economy, and to which extent it's still squeezing more out of the same. And I'll give you one specific example. I had a pleasure to be in Tbilisi late last year, and we had very interesting discussion with American Chamber of Commerce. I understand that your economy is very much dependent on agriculture, and we were asking about the sources of development and growth, and indeed we're asking about how investors view the situation, whether they trust your state food and veterinary service, and it just coincided with this famous, or perhaps known for you, case of nuts. You are one of the biggest exporters of nuts, and there was this case in Italy where nuts were infected with fleas, and they had to be returned. So what they were mentioning, that investment in agriculture and for efficiency, whatever gains more efficient and perhaps bigger scale production, is prohibited because investors don't trust the capacity of veterinary phytosanitary service actually to enforce spraying of these nuts bushes or trees, so that if they invest and small farmers around will not treat their nuts plantations accordingly, they will face problems. So that's a question, is it, I mean, how much is it squeezing out of existing one, and how much is it about really creating developmental opportunities already? Thank you.
This is 100% addressed to you, yeah?
Okay. If I may?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you for this interesting question, and the issue is quite important for us. You rightly mentioned that Georgia is exporting hazelnuts, and it enters into 5 biggest exporters of hazelnuts around the world. And it's our major commodity, agricultural commodity, exported to the European market, and we pay an important attention to this process. You rightly mentioned there was a case of infringement, or let's say that some business operators mixed peanuts in a nuts production, and it was revealed in European Union, and sufficient alert was made in the RASF system, Rapid Alert System of Food Safety. And DG Sante also additionally informed our counterparts about this case. And what was the response of the government of Georgia? We immediately started investigation. The special service which is responsible for this investigation under the Ministry of Finance started this process. We identified the person who was, let's say, initiator of this behavior actment, and relevant sentences were, let's say, imposed against him. We informed about our activities, European Union, and in addition to this investigation, I would like to add that we introduced new technical regulation on hazelnuts after that case, and which we undertook commitments to check all commodity, all lots of hazelnut exported to the European market in order to avoid such kind of cases. And these actions were very positively assessed by the European Commission, and then Georgia was put in some reduced frequency of checks in European markets. Still, there are single cases, but very important is, and the European Commission also agrees with us, how government of Georgia reacts on these cases. What steps are undertaken in order to improve the situation? With regard to the institutional transformation you mentioned, of course, currently our National Food Agency is not recognized as equivalent to the European Union, and that's an idea behind this whole legal approximation process. After we finalize everything and transpose all requirements in our legislation, then we will be able to apply for recognition of equivalence, and of course then it will be considered that our food safety authority is same and on the same standard as it is in European Union. Of course, I'm not saying that we have an ideal competent authorities. There are problems, there are challenges, but it is very important that we are working on this and we are trying to improve situation. Thank you.
Let me add maybe on Ukrainian experience, because we had, let's say, more profound problems, because there was a problem, I think, a decade ago with remain of natural oil materials in the shipment of sunflower oil. And it led even to introduction of specific certification procedure by the EU on Ukrainian sunflower oil, just an additional procedure which allowed to reinstate trust into shipment of product. It was not a food safety issue, but the issue of, let's say, cleanness of the product. And yes, indeed, but this kind of example, so that it was like a big problem and problem of mistrust. It led to additional bureaucratic procedure, but it allowed in 2 or 3 years to reinstate this trust. But now, when we have this mutual recognition of this status of authority, of a level of regulation, we also have a number of issues appearing in the system. Also, for example, in one shipment of honey there were dead bees, or it appears sometimes. Or we had some, for example, in certain region of Kherson region, the bird flu, whether the EU shall close all importation of poultry from Ukraine or just to limit the particular region. So when you reach this level of trust, it doesn't mean that you are 100% compliant. So different things can happen, especially with honey. So the reason why these, let's say, examples of shipment of honey with dead bees happen, because the demand for Ukrainian honey is so high that people in the EU are buying whatever volume of Ukrainian honey. It means that there is no less ambitious about quality. So if you have, just ship us everything what you have. It leads to this question of quality of this stuff. But the way of reaction, the way of counteraction between authorities is important, because it's not about 100% compliance. It's about the way how Ukrainian authority react to this, how they're capable to explain the reason and to really let's say, really mitigate all this problem after this reaction. So sometimes problems are really good, just to show that the bureaucratic reaction of Ukrainian authorities is of European style. And we had a really perfect example of this. If you remember, there was a problem of E. coli bacteria in vegetables in the European Union, and Russian authorities immediately closed the importation of fruits and vegetables from the EU, and Ukrainian authorities said, no, we believe that additional inspection is enough, and there were no blockage of EU import. And it was a really, let's say, good example of a rational and proportional reaction to the problem as well. So this experience is really good and useful. So your question and comment.
Well, first of all, it's lunchtime already, so.
And we are talking about food, that's why it's even more difficult, yeah.
That's saying that don't shoot me, because just very briefly, one issue is that Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova, when they were negotiating association agreements with European Union, it was logical to demand from the European Union recognition of the asymmetric rules of origin, diagonal accumulation, diagonal accumulation of that. It was not done. That's to my surprise, actually, because Georgia, for example, it was recognized between Georgia and Turkey by EU, but not between Moldova, Ukraine. We have free trade with Moldova, we have with Ukraine. There are, and also free trade with EU. It was easy to do, but there was no will. Still, I would not wait for the operability of the pan-European system of accumulation of origins and make it between Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova and EU. So would have asked EU to recognize it as quickly as possible. This is very important for integration of our economies of our 3 states, that we are aspiring to become EU member states, all 3, and we need to integrate, and this is important. The second thing is that I understand that this is international practice, but drawbacks are prohibited. I mean, drawbacks or tax drawbacks. It's, I will explain. when, for example, we have recognized rules of origins with EU, and on certain products we have right, for example, to include from third countries imported goods, imported components from third countries to a certain level, depending on the what the annex, the special annex of the CFTA says about it, this product concrete. But this part of product which is imported from, for example, from Azerbaijan to Georgia and free of taxes, it's still to pay VAT, which is 18%, I think, until VAT, something, 18 or 20, I'm not sure, 20%. Paying VAT. Usually when the product is exported, VAT is reimbursed. But the association agreement says that reimbursement for just products, what imported products who are exported then outside, is prohibited. So then it reduces very much the benefit of this CFTA with you, because, for example, we were expecting, and lots of Georgians expected, that Azeris, the Kazakh and others producers would be interested to cooperate with Georgian producers to sell their components and then to export to you free of charges, as having so recognized as a Georgian product. But this will not happen as far as they should pay this 18%, and they have no right to take this 18% while exporting together with Georgian goods. So not so complicated, actually. Maybe my explanation would, but I was asking if anybody knows, is it possible to, for three countries, to advocate together and to change this provision in association agreement and allow this, because this is very important for development of these countries. Yeah. Development of Georgia very much depends on the cooperation with third countries and the interest of third countries to use benefits of this CFTA too. So this is my...
I think that you tried to explain the one of most complicated element of protocol on rules of origin, and the number of people who read this protocol of rules of origin is limited, and then the number of people who understand this drawback issue. In Ukraine we discussed drawback issue as well when we were on the level of on the stage of signing the association agreement. There were a lot of critics about this provision, but in my opinion, since I participated in this discussion, that unfortunately our bargaining position is too weak to ask for certain exemption, because the protocol on rules of origin is, let's say, typical one. So with this idea of pan-Euro-Mediterranean protocol on rules of origins, you are just take it or leave it, so no exemptions are allowed. This is the first thing. And you know how EU, how good EU in defending its position when something is already fixed in certain document. They will just say that these are the rules you should obey, and that's all. Yeah. And just give up. Yes, just agree and live with it. And there is another problem, because what you are promoting is something which the EU and the US are afraid of, because if you will follow the discussion on NAFTA, and what Trump is talking is that they want to squeeze Chinese goods, yeah, from this production chain, and they do it by means of modification of rules of origin. So rules of origins are become tougher and tougher, requiring more depth, more elements of these national elements and parts in the final product. And the EU as well is sometimes paranoid in its agreements with third countries. The agreement with Republic of Korea, where rules of origins were the toughest topic for automobile industry, and it was also a question about whether Chinese components can be used in Korean cars, which will be exported with, let's say, without duties to the EU. That's why I think that. But your question is important. Why? Because what we discuss here, and I think that this is, since it's lunchtime, it will be some kind of conclusion, that what we discuss here is peculiarities and details. And what we may say is that on the basis of these details, we are talking about success of association agreements, and two kinds of successes. First success is success of export. Yeah, so we can, by figures, by example, say that Ukraine export to the EU one thing, Moldova another, Georgia another, there are more investments and so on, and we know how to use these technocratic things to promote this economic integration, what we've been discussing. Another element is, for me, is a surprising element, because when there was a meeting, a first meeting of Eastern Partnership Group and blah, 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 on economic integration. And there was an offer from the EU side to promote economic integration between Eastern Partnership states on the basis of EU rules. It was once again almost 10 years ago, yeah, and I laugh at this proposal saying that you offer to integrate, to use EU rules for integration of post-Soviet republic, and so we have GOSTs, we have CIS agreements, we are already integrated enough, so why we need to use EU rules? Just replace one model of integration with another model of integration, so it's useless. But now, as you hear, that at least 3 states can say that for us, it's easier to switch finally to pan-Euro-Mediterranean rules of origins, to diagonal cumulation, and just to leave CIS trade regime just for trade with Russia, Kazakhstan, and so on. And so it means that the EU rules are becoming more and more important to our bilateral relations as well, and this is also a sign of success. But the problem still appears that how to explain this technocratic success to politicians here in parliament or to general public, but it applies not only to our context, it applies globally when we are talking about trade policy. So thank you for everyone who survived this session, full of different topics, stories, and so on. But honestly, I am really glad that we are so eager to discuss these technocratic issues Friday with good weather and after a lot of discussion on approximation. So, and now I give a floor to Dmitro Shulga, who will sum up all our discussions, yeah, for 2 days. So we will spend another 3 hours, yeah.
Well, Taras raised the expectations. We have a problem of too high expectations about lunch, because lunch time was actually scheduled for 1:30, and it's so we have still some 10 minutes.
Oh, 10 minutes.
Okay, so I will invite, if Claudius, if you could join, take a seat, and Zoriana, if you can. If some of the panelists could free a seat for you, thank you very much. Because I mean, major people who organized the whole event, and we would like to have just very brief reflection about what was it for the last 3 days, to have a feedback from you, and maybe some ideas, some brainstorming for what next. It's meant to be an annual event, and we hope we will be able to continue for the next year as well. So any reflection from your side, how good or bad it was, what can be done better, what was useful, what was not really, whatever. Please. General comments. I mean, specific, but general and short. Michael, you?
Yeah, I have a very simple comment. I thought the conception and organization of this second forum was excellent, and I hope you managed to institutionalize this in the sense of having a third one and so forth, because it's absolutely well worth doing.
Thank you. Please, lady.
I managed to attend, I think, 3 or 4 panels during 3 days. So that was for someone who is working in Kiev and has an office in Kiev. That's quite successful, I would say. And I would like to thank the organizers, because it's by far the most useful and well-organized exchange that I've attended during the last month. There's a lot of bad examples how it should not be done, especially with panel discussions, but here it really made a difference. I think one of the reasons is the good mixture of science and of practitioners and of reflections from East, from West. So this is something that is really, really successful and really to be pointed out. And thank you very much for this food for thought. 2 recommendations maybe. I think that sometimes the Ukraine focus was a little bit too dominant, which is of course due to the fact that it's here in Kiev, but sometimes I would have wished for a little bit more insight also, or reflection on the other countries. And then I think that's a comment that I already made last week. Coming from Berlin, I must say that it's rather unusual to have several panels with only male speakers, so maybe you can be a little bit more balanced also in generation and, well, gender issues. Thank you.
Thanks.
Babinski, can I just say yes, we need more younger women in the panels. And the other thing is, of course, it's really very well organized and very useful, and I've learned a lot on the technical details. I didn't realize the technical details could be so exciting and so interesting. It would be good to have more of a civil society component, kind of real civil society people who have no idea what's going on, don't understand, have opinions and want to voice them, but sometimes take up time. But actually, I think we have a lot of very good experts and a lot of very good officials, and I'm very grateful for them for coming. But we need ordinary civil society people, more of them. Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else? Kasia?
Thank you very much. I think we all hope that the event continues, because it's one of its type that, having a possibility of looking at multiple levels and talking with 3 countries and obviously EU experts. So from that point of view, it's invaluable. And I think you make a case for continuation of this event. Perhaps one suggestion is, and I don't know, I'm in 2 minds. Because the agenda was so heavy, we discussed a lot of issues. Whether to have the panel on sort of future vision at the beginning, when we are still sort of optimistic and fresh, or towards the end, when we have a bit of reality check. And I'm in 2 minds, because there are pluses and minuses, but this is something which has basically, the discussion would have been a bit different if it were at the end rather than the beginning. So that's food for thought.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else? No? Claudio, Zariana, maybe you would share your...
First of all, as an organizer, I want to thank everybody for your presence and for your contribution, because it's the people who are the most important part of any event. And I hope that we have provided an opportunity for you to learn about other countries, to learn about other experiences, but also to foster communication and cooperation between you. And it's also, I guess, one of the side events of our forums that we try to nurture this community of people who care about association agreement implementation, who know all the details about what's going on in any of the 3 countries. And it's very important that we stay in touch, that we share our analysis. And I know that there is a number of very fresh studies prepared by some of the speakers that were here, and I promised to share these links to these publications. But anyway, you can read and when you're back home on where you're in office, but you cannot have this communication and share thoughts also during breaks, because some people say that breaks are the most important part of any conference. So I do hope that this forum have provided venue for new ideas, for new research ideas, new action ideas, and we'll be really happy to continue with this in the future. And we'll get back to you in a proper time to invite for the next forum.
Yeah, I probably will add just a couple of words and comments. We joined a bit later on already into this game, so all compliments should be going to Civic Energy and Renaissance Foundation first of all. Indeed, I mean, I see here a tradition at the highest of a higher standard, basically community of experts, official, civil society, which are caring about association and basically which can promote ideas and could bring it forward. And of course, I mean, keeping this community a bit alive is the main purpose of it. What we have tried to contribute, I mean, to this conference is not just, I mean, common discussion about association, but ideas on trilateral cooperation, even formalized in a sense, which can be used to promote exchange between free countries and with the EU, both at political level, where we see, I mean, this as a big added value, also in economic area, trade area, what we saw, in order to make this association to function. Because conceptually I have realized it also myself, again, I express it, but I would like just to maybe repeat it once more. For me, association is not, as usually somehow described, a good blueprint for reform. We made even a paper, EU Strat project on that. We will continue. So sometimes there are good rules, I mean, which can be used in public procurement, some other areas, I mean, but acquis has never been intended to be a good blueprint for running a country. A key purpose of the acquis was to deal with cross-border externalities of exchange between countries, and the real purpose of the acquis and the real purpose of the association is exactly to make exchange happen and to make it then feed up into the dynamic, economic, political dynamic of these countries. So basically then exactly trade, investment, political dynamic is the most important, therefore exchange, volume of exchange is the most important measurement of the association success. So I hope, I mean, then exactly this institutionalization between free countries and this institutionalization of exchange will continue. I very hope so. What I would suggest also maybe for the next time, exactly, since I consider FDI a crucial thing, only next to civil society kind of empowerment, I would suggest making a session on FDI promotion, because it's about economic opening. We are talking mostly about political opening here, but we see what exactly these opportunities of association cannot be fully exploited without economic opening in all these countries, and this is still the biggest challenge. I think we will cooperate, I hope we will cooperate in the future, and I would like to thank everybody for the excellent contribution. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, my observation is that compared with the first Association Exchange Forum 1 year ago, we spent not 2 days but 3 days. We got representatives also from the members of the European Parliament and from national parliaments. We also got representation from views from Western Balkans with their specific experience, from some important member states like France. So we are expanding our discussion. We've got several parallel panels, and going into more details thanks to that. For those of you who missed and kind of had really was hesitating which of the panel to visit, good message is that everything was recorded, so you will be able to watch online what you missed. This is also my intention, because I mean you can't be at the same time at different places. And yeah, we actually expanded. First of all, we expanded the circle of co-organizers and the partners, and I think that the specific role of Lithuania should be stressed here, because Lithuania is really a political promoter, but also organizational promoter of these kind of discussions of our 3 countries, and I think this is a very good sign. And well, the context, we are all aware about the context for the next year. We will be meeting probably after elections in all of our countries, probably after Brexit. We'll see. So there will be quite a lot of things to discuss. That's for sure. And I think for the civil society, just to quickly react to Chris, we will, I mean, it's not the end of the story, today's discussion. Actually, after lunch, for those of you who want to discuss specifically for the civil society role and experience and what we can do together, we will have a separate session. So for those of you who will be interested, please stay. And just for the final remark on Claudia's words, I think that we were discussing with a parallel session on post-visa free agenda that there is hardly kind of big thing to see after visa free is ensured, anything big except for enlargement as such. But actually those things, like real things, which comes as a reality this year for Ukraine, for instance, like Ryanair, flights from Ukraine, like H&M opening to Ukraine, like coming of IKEA to Ukraine. These are the real things. These are the real signs of integration. This is the real exchange, increased exchange. This is the real association at work. And I think this is the real result of all those kind of end result of all those discussions which are visible for the society. And I think that's why we are not only talking about all those kind of difficult to understand things to explain to the people, but very kind of important for the end effect. So that's why I think it's worth to continue, and I hope that you will stay with us and see you next year in Kiev. Thanks.